Hi, welcome to The Wire. I am Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. 30 years ago, Indian politics was a completely different ballgame. There was a complete domination of the Congress. Rajiv Gandhi had ensured that the Congress party had won in 1984 more than 400 seats in Lok Sabha. At that time, there was actually very little opposition that one could think of. The BJP, which is in power today, at that point had just 2 members in Lok Sabha. It was considered to be completely a marginal force. Nobody was really interested in the study of the BJP or any of the other related affiliated organizations from what at that point didn't have the name which we all talk every moment is the Sangh Parivar. At that time, there was the peripheral Ram Janam Bhoomi, the temple movement for the temple in Ayodhya had already started. But there was very little literature, academic, at that particular time to study and try to understand what this RSS, what its entire Hindu nationalism was all about. At that particular time, a book came out which first of all gave the name of saffron, the Brotherhood in Saffron, written by Walter Andersen and his co-author Sridhar Damle. This book which I have with me now is 30 years old, and for the last 30 years it has been a constant reference material for anybody who has written about the BJP, about the RSS and other affiliated organizations. 3 decades later, Walter Andersen decided that it was time to take a fresh look at the RSS. I am today joined by Walter Andersen, who has very recently written a second sequel kind of to this book. Welcome, Walter.
Thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you. It's been a long cherished dream, to actually interact with you and talk about the RSS and what kind of work you have been doing. First of all, my question is that in the last 30 years plus that you have been tracking the RSS, when you came back to study it seriously, what struck you, that what had changed most fundamentally in the RSS?
Yes, the reason that we sort of have moved to do the book was a sense that India has changed significantly, and therefore, by extension, the RSS must have as well. And our research, and we did 3 years of research. We really started about 2015 early, and then we finished it in...
All these 3 years, we have been waiting very impatiently for the book.
And not too long ago, because there was some incidents that happened, we had to go back and revise the text. But a couple things. I would say first is the vast expansion of both the RSS and its affiliates. And then the second thing in relation to that is that there's been a proliferation of affiliates around the RSS. Before there was just a handful, now there's almost 100 of them. And in many cases, they are the most significant associations in their area of work. The Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh is the largest labor union. The Vidyarthi Parishad is the largest student activity. And then they have many activities in all sorts of fields, including a recent one, women's empowerment. Shri Shakti is one that is relatively recent. So that's the second, and that's, I think, the most, in my view, the most interesting development is the growth of these affiliates and their increasing power in the Sangh Parivar, the RSS family. The third thing is that with the expansion of the RSS and its affiliates, you're bringing in all sorts of new groups into this larger organization. Many of them have conflicting interests. And so what you have developing is you have groups, take the issue of foreign direct investment. The BJP finds it important to have foreign direct investment. The Prime Minister at Davos sort of, expounded the virtues of globalization, trade, that sort of thing. This is not met with uniform enthusiasm among the organizations. The Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh is not happy. Swadeshi Jagran Manch, in fact, was founded to oppose foreign direct investment and still does. And so you have these conflicting views.
These oppositions really does not lead to any fissure.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One of the issues we addressed is Indian organizations tend to split quickly and easily. Why has this hasn't happened in the RSS? We have a case study where it got close, but it didn't quite work, and we go into why it didn't work. And I'd say there are 2 reasons why fissures haven't developed, despite the growing differences in the various groups that form the RSS family. Basically, I think there are 2. One is the fact that most of these organizations are administratively controlled by pracharaks, full-time RSS workers, who are kind of at the apex of them. Now, these Pracharks, one of the things that we discovered in our study, tend to identify with the interests of the group on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're loyal.
Also look after the RSS.
Yes, they're loyal to the fact of a cohesive group. In fact, they think that the cohesiveness is important for nation building.
I think, a very key sentence, which I remember. Vajpayee, when he was Prime Minister, had gone to the United States, and he was asked, at that time there was a local turbulence, and he had made this famous statement that once a Pracharak, always a Pracharak. Yes. I think it was a very symbolic, and what you're trying to say is possibly explained by what he had said.
Right. I mean, the Pracharks, some people have compared them to a casteless, ascetic, monastic order of Hinduism. Which you're right. It's a nice analogy to use because most of them are unmarried. Most of them, give up wealth and family linkages as well. Now, what's happening is you're getting more and more what they call household people, usually men who are close to retirement and who are paid, who are working in it. But and I use the comparison in the book. They don't have the legitimacy and the prestige of the fully trained RSS Prachark. They are the top of the prestige grouping inside the RSS. So, the very fact you have these groups with different interests is a new development. And then the final one, in some ways the most interesting, is the RSS itself, which continues its character building program. Increasingly, however, has focused its efforts on mediation of disputes. Right. And that has become very important. In fact, the book starts with a description of one of these intra-organizational...
The meeting in 2015, September,
which was large and important.
Where you had representatives from the RSS, from various affiliates, as well as from the government, various ministers. It was almost like ministers coming and making PowerPoint presentations.
Right. In fact, some did.
To the RSS.
Some did. Some did.
Now, this is what actually brings me to a point, which has been written quite extensively in your first book, where you talk about as to how the initial Sarsang Chalak, especially Hedgewar and Golwakar, they thought that the politics was generally seen to be something very immoral, which was supposed to be shunned. Their entire emphasis was on character building and organizational building. By the time you people wrote the first book, some of it had been shed. But now there is a far greater direct involvement, and there is no reason for the RSS to be apologetic about trying to influence politics directly or indirectly. How have you found this?
That's true. In fact, that's one of the most interesting of the changes that have taken place from 3 decades ago, when there still was a strong sense. It was beginning to change because Deo Ross, the then Sarsang Chalak, had a much more activist orientation. He was the person, for example, who opened up the RSS to Muslims and Christians. But, what has driven this is the affiliates. And I have a whole chapter which I describe that, is the affiliates depend, because the government of India is so pervasive in its functioning, depends on government actions to succeed. Let's take, farming. The RSS affiliate in farming is concerned with crop prices, with storage, with transportation, with inputs like water and electricity. Because they're interested, the RSS is interested. It's to their advantage to do so. On the other hand, the same farm associate is much against FDI. Right. So how do you handle them? So is the Bharatiya Mazdoor. So they have these meetings and they try to sort of work out some kind of compromise. That's become the role of the RSS.
They couldn't really work out this compromise when Vajpayee was Prime Minister, but during Modi's tenure, it seems to have been worked out.
And that's because the difference in leadership. Mohan Bhagwat is much more of
pragmatic.
Pragmatic and the diplomat.
Yep.
And his predecessor was kind of, hard-edged.
There was also all kinds of seniority and personality issues between him and the BJP leadership.
And Vajpayee too. He and Vajpayee, yes.
Sudarshan was a very difficult person to actually interact with. And
not warm and fuzzy, no.
Yeah, not really, as many people within the RSS have said, not really leadership material.
Whereas this man, is, I've met him on a couple of occasions. He's very charming, and in ways that his predecessor, who I also met, was not nearly as charming. But he's worked out the system, and part of it is this, system of getting various groups together. Land and labor, two important issues for the government, because, economists have told them, including the former head of the Niti Aayog has told them, that we need to have some kind of resolution of this to grow the economy. Well, it hasn't happened at the national level. Now, why hasn't it happened? Some people say it's the opposition, to it from other parties. That's not the real reason. The real reason is opposition from within. Because on both of those issues, the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh and the Farmers Union and the Farmers Organization have opposed it. So what they did is a very clever thing. They passed it on to states, because you have constitutional right to do so on these kind of issues. And several states have passed legislation in it. But it hasn't happened at the central level, and it's probably not going to happen anytime soon because of the internal divisions. Right. Now, the RSS has called meetings. In fact, Ram Madhav, I know, has been involved in some of these meetings where you had groups come together. They've made suggestions to the government. The government has incorporated those suggestions, but it hasn't got enough traction. So they passed it on. They may take it up again, but if they do, they have to get a consensus before they do so.
Right. Now, coming back to your book, we can actually straight away divide the book into two different parts. One, there is a theoretical part, which we're taking stock as to what has changed between then and now, kind of a thing, as to how the definition of Hindutva has also possibly evolved over the past few decades. There's also this entire aspect of new issues which the BJP, the RSS has to confront with. There's a completely different script when they have to deal with something like the BJP wanting to share power in Kashmir, when the BJP not being very certain whether it should quote unquote, quote the Muslims or not, or whether it should completely try to maximize the 85% odd Hindu voter which is there. So there have been these various issues, new issues which have come up. You try to take it up through case studies as you talk in the book. Can you tell me a bit about this, how the approach of the theory and the case studies, how you have gone about in the
Actually,
book?
it was the late Lloyd and Suzanne Rudolph, who are my professors and who are our mentors on the first book, which I think is one reason why the first book was, I personally think was a very good book, and they have a lot of the responsibility is their advice that they gave us. And they advised us to do the second book. And on the issue, for example, that you were alluding to as theory and practice, particularly in the Kashmir case in Muslims. In the Kashmir case, a very interesting, dilution of the RSS ideology. In that,
think so?
Yes, in that they were willing to have the establishment of a group, coalition, which in its common minimum program put the Article 370 on the shelf. Okay. And, in many ways, this was anathema in the past to the RSS, and there was grumbling.
They talked about a review of Article 370 even during the 2014 campaign. Yes. Modi personally talked about it.
Right. But in the RSS circles, yes, this really was anathema. Okay. But
get involved with governance of Jammu and Kashmir while Article 370 was still in place. Yeah. That is what you're trying to argue.
Well, they agreed to put it on the shelf. And each side said we have a different view, but at the end of the day, there was a compromise that put it on the shelf. And the same is true with the act that permitted the
But in Kashmir, eventually, when the BJP came out of the coalition and imposed central rule, in one way it was going back to its hardcore positions.
I don't think so. I don't think so. If you saw the comment of Ram Madhav, he, in a sense, said, the coalition was good, a good thing. There were problems. We had eventually to pull out of it. But underneath that, there was a recognition that if they're going to have another government, it has to be with a party that is largely a Muslim party. And you're going to have the same issue come up again.
But that is going to affect the BJP's fortunes in the rest of the country.
Maybe not. I don't know. But it could have been partly, and I think it was partly a political dimension in pulling out because of the issues. There were some issues that really aroused the antagonism of the Jammu Hindus in the state. But the interesting thing, theoretical, about all of this, which we try to, in the chapter on Kashmir, which we say tactics versus strategy, is extending the idea of Hindutva from a group that is Hindu in Jammu. Before, the RSS and the BJP had been largely restricted, in fact, almost totally restricted, to Hindus in Jammu. In this case, they were now speaking in an all Kashmir, which included Muslims with whom a Muslim party they had a coalition. That's a very different direction. In fact, Ram Madhav, he had to be careful, of course, in how he said it, but that, if you read underneath of what he was saying, he said, we're going to do it again. Try it again. And so that was an interesting issue. Now, we have another chapter on the Rashtriya Muslim Manch, which is the group that they have organized to approach Muslims. And they've been thinking of this organization for actually quite a long time. And it wasn't until I think it was 2002 or 3 that it was formally organized.
But they still don't admit Muslims or women into their decision-making bodies.
Of the Muslim Rashtriya Manch? Oh no, there are some.
No, the Rashtriya Manch continues as an affiliate.
Yes.
Now, within the RSS, Muslims are still not in the decision-making
women,
body.
because there aren't
You
women.
do talk about a few Muslim pracharaks.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd actually be able to just get a handful.
And I'm sure that and participants in Shaka there are Muslims.
Yes, but not very many. I have not really come across
to be quite frank,
anyone so far.
I haven't either.
I have not traveled.
And I've traveled a lot.
Yeah.
And I haven't either. But I'm told that there are. And also, now in fact, I have met a couple of Muslim boys who are in Shakas, their local units. And I'm told that there are about 50,000 Muslims who attend schools that are run by, in fact, there was a boy in the Northeast who won a national award, Muslim boy, who attended one of these groups. RSS.
There have been such reports. There have been, a lot of publicity has been given by RSS.
By and large, voting statistics indicate that the percentage of Muslims who have voted for the BJP is relatively low, though under Modi it was probably higher than it was before. Though a Muslim friend of mine said, you have to be very careful when you talk about Muslims. He said, Hindus often talk about Muslims as if we are a united, homogenous group. We are not.
No, definitely not.
They're not. There are Shias. Now,
in fact, it is said, the RSS engages with the Shias more than the Sunnis.
Well,
and that is because, the Shias really do not have any voice within the community.
Yeah. They in some areas they do. In some areas they're actually quite significant, like in Lucknow. There's a very
some geographical pockets, but say for instance the entire Ayodhya issue, whenever the RSS has tried to engage, there has been an emphasis on trying to engage with the Shia groups, which really does not matter after the court cases involving the dispute between the Shias and the Sunnis.
Right.
So thereafter, with it being declared as a Sunni mosque, you really do not, mix. Moving on to another little aspect in your book, you talk very important, significantly about the RSS involvement with, of having a greater policy impact. Now, if you look at the BJP and the Jansangh previously, there have been 4 episodes where they have actually wielded political power. The first time that it happened was after the 1967 elections, when the BJP, the Jansangh at that point, was a partner in some of the state governments in North India. Then you had the Janata Party period, where the Jansangh was again in important ministries. 2 of its biggest stalwarts, Vajpayee and Advani, controlled very crucial ministries. Even the industry ministry was with them. Then came the Vajpayee government, and now you have the Modi government. Now, over these years, progressively, have you seen the RSS getting more and more involved in impacting public policy?
Yes, but not for those reasons.
Yes.
It's a separate and parallel development of the affiliates. In some ways, and I use this analogy at the book launch, it's the tail wagging the dog, the tail being the affiliates. And with the development of the affiliates, all of them, because of the pervasiveness of the Indian government on life in India, have had to deal with the government. Take the farm issue that I mentioned to you before. You need price controls, you need input prices, and a range of things. They have to deal with the government. So the RSS, because the affiliate has to deal with the government, becomes interested in the government. And some of these meetings that they have across the RSS family meetings addresses those issues to try to come out with a compromise that everyone can. It doesn't always work. On land and labor, for example, as I mentioned, the compromise didn't work, even though they tried very hard to get it didn't work, so they had to sort of go on and do something. That's what's new about it, and I think in investigating the RSS in the future, people really need to look at the affiliate. I'm amazed there has been so little focus, both in academia and in journalistic coverage of the RSS, so little coverage of because I think that that's the really interesting development.
Right. There's another very key issue whenever we talk about the RSS, whenever we talk about the BJP or any of the other affiliates, is the adherence to the principles of democracy and democratic functioning. The RSS has a formal way of electing its Sarsanchalak, its general secretary. But like most political organizations in India, we know that how genuine and how collective is this actual process of electioneering. So, given the fact that the RSS commitment to democracy and the democratic values has always been questioned, how do you, as a serious scholar, look at it, and to what extent is the organization as people really concerned about promoting democracy in this country?
In the initial days after independence, there were many in the RSS who were suspicious of the democratic process, who weren't sure that it could really function in India, and who were highly suspicious of what even then was referred to as this deep state putting restrictions on its activities. And then came the first ban, which only convinced them to do so. And you had a number of RSS people at that time who advocated the RSS turning itself into a political party, which Golwalkar was adamantly opposed to. It didn't do so. Now, that has progressively changed. And here again, what's been driving that change has been the affiliates, of which one, of course, has been both the Jana Sangh and the BJP, that it is involved in the democratic game. And it has not done badly, in fact, in the democratic game. And so the RSS, which is not a political party and therefore has, doesn't have a stake as such in the democratic process, has gone along with it. Partly being driven by the fact of fear of restrictions put on its activities. That has always been an underlying theme in the RSS and has driven many of its actions, including some that are quite surprising. Let's take the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, led by a man, Tagadia, who is becoming an embarrassment to it because of some of the things.
Eased out.
Yeah, he was eased out, and everyone knows, it's a kind of well-known, quote-unquote, secret, that the RSS was part of that process of getting him out, and having a very moderate person who I think is from the Delhi area, lawyer, take his place, so that the Vishwa Hindu Parishad would sort of get away from some of these steps that it was.
Does not really create problems. Yeah. One last question before we wind up, talking about your book. Quite often there is a comparison between Vajpayee as a political personality and Narendra Modi. Globally, it is stated by almost everybody, whether you're an admirer or a critic, that Modi is fundamentally, or in terms of his own persona, more authoritarian in character than a Vajpayee, that he's closer to Indira Gandhi, who has seen Indian politics. You have seen Indira Gandhi's tenure, you have seen Vajpayee's emergence, you have seen Modi emerge from the flanks of the RSS. How do you really, agree, or to what extent really do you agree with this proposition of him being essentially a leader in the authoritarian mold?
I know Modi has enormous admiration for Vajpayee. In fact, if you listen to the speeches, he's actually modeled his pattern of speaking after Vajpayee. And I've watched the two, I've watched hours of the two speaking and comparing. They both start softly and then they begin to build up into a crescendo and using analogy.
It's been said, that both are actually been very good performers.
Actually, both are really superb performers. In fact,
and Modi's public speaking has really evolved. If you go back and listen to his public speeches in the mid-90s, for instance, you'll find that he was a pale shadow of what he is now.
Right. Right now, I doubt there is a politician in India who equals him in his speaking capacity.
I think he outdoes what Vajpayee ever did.
Yeah, all of them.
In terms of speaking.
But
in terms of his commitment, do you think he's authoritarian at heart?
The authoritarian personality is difficult and controversial as an issue. To be quite frank, I have no way of knowing, whether I have met him, I've talked to him, and in terms of his responses and what he's done, he comes from a very different background than Vajpayee. Yeah. Vajpayee was a Brahmin who came from the top of Indian society and had many advantages as a young man, going to college and all that. That Modi didn't have. Modi is an OBC. who came from a very
But
poor
his
family.
caste got added to the OBC list much later.
Well,
He didn't grow up as an OBC.
Well, he grew up as a very poor person.
Yeah. He
The
grew up in a poor family.
The family was
He
poor.
grew up
and-
in a family.
and
I've
in
studied-
no ways that had the advantages.
He did not have the privileges
No,
which a Vajpayee
not-
would have had.
And so he had to work as a young man helping his father. You know, the garam chai. You know, that
He
sort of
also
thing.
had to struggle much more in his initial years within the RSS
Yes.
than Vajpayee had.
Yes, that's right. And had a different kind of personality. Vajpayee was, you know, by all accounts, I also met Vajpayee, was warm and fuzzy and collegial. There's a harder edge to the, as one would expect. Someone had to come up that way. Always has a certain toughness that develops about them. I don't know, and you see that if you watch them talk, and I've watched literally hundreds of hours watching him talk. When he's sitting, he's kind of sitting and thinking, and you've seen this, I'm sure, many times. He gets up as if there's a switch that goes on, and you know, it becomes, you know, he's on the stage, and he has the stage. Then he
He's
sits
exactly
down,
like an actor who moves from his makeup room to under the lights.
and then he sits down.
And then he starts off.
It goes off.
Well,
again.
thank you very much, Walter. We hope that you continue to write on the RSS and you know, enlighten a large number of Indian
Well,
and
my wife
global
has said
readers.
if I try to do another book, she'll divorce me because it's so time consuming to do something like this.
It is.
But I appreciate the chance of talking with you.
Well, that was Walter Andersen. You know, we were talking about his latest book. Please do have a look at the book because it possibly provides tremendous insights. You may agree or disagree, that's besides the point, but the point is that it will give you tremendous information and insight into the RSS and the entire world of the Sangh Parivar. Thank you very much for watching.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.